The sound of a key turning in a rusty lock echoed through the small attic room, where Nora Blackwood had spent the last year of her life a prisoner in what was once her own home. Through the dirty window, she could see the vast Montana landscape stretching toward the distant mountains, a cruel reminder of the freedom that had been stolen from her after her husband's death in 1876. The door creaked open, revealing her mother-in-law's stern face, the daily tray of meager food balanced in her wrinkled hands. "Your breakfast," Martha Blackwood said coldly, placing the tray on the floor just inside the door. "The Reverend is coming for dinner tonight. You will remain silent. If he hears a sound from this attic, there will be consequences." Nora nodded, her once vibrant eyes now dulled by months of confinement. At 23, the young widow had learned that disagreement only brought punishment. After her husband Thomas died in a mining accident, his parents had taken control of everything: the ranch, the money, and her life, claiming she was too grief-stricken to manage her affairs. What had begun as temporary care had become imprisonment when she tried to leave. "I need fresh water for washing," Nora said quietly, her voice raspy from disuse. Martha's lips thinned. "You'll get water when I decide you need it." She closed the door, the lock clicking into place with finality. Alone again, Nora moved to the window, pressing her palm against the glass as she had countless times before. Her wedding ring had been taken months ago, sold by her father-in-law Gerald to pay for new cattle. Everything that had been hers was now theirs, except her will to escape. Miles away, a man known throughout the territory as the Shadow Rider dismounted his horse at the edge of a small creek. Pulling off his dusty hat, he revealed a weathered face and piercing blue eyes that had seen too much for his 30 years. Few knew him by his given name, Holt Reeves preferring instead the moniker he'd earned during the 5 years he'd spent outside the law. Holt splashed creek water on his face, washing away the dust of the trail. His horse, a magnificent black stallion named Midnight, drank deeply beside him. 3 years had passed since his pardon, granted by the governor himself after Holt had saved his daughter from kidnappers. Now, he worked as a bounty hunter, tracking men worse than he'd ever been, though many still crossed the street when they saw him coming. "What do you think, Midnight?" he asked, scratching the horse behind its ears. "Think we can make Silver Creek by nightfall?" The horse snorted in response, and Holt smiled, a rare expression that softened his features. "That's what I thought too." Silver Creek was a small but growing town nestled in a valley 20 miles north. Holt had received word that a man he'd been tracking for weeks, Jacob Winters, wanted for robbery and murder, had been spotted there. The bounty would keep him fed through winter, but it wasn't just about the money. Winters had killed a young woman during his last robbery, and some crimes couldn't go unpunished. Mounting Midnight, Holt continued north, unaware that his path would soon cross with a desperate woman whose life hung in precarious balance behind locked doors. In the attic room, Nora had developed a routine to maintain her sanity. Each morning, she exercised as best she could in the confined space, stretching her limbs and pacing the perimeter. She recited poetry she had memorized in her schoolgirl days, sang softly to herself, and watched the changing sky through her window, her only connection to the outside world. Today, however, something different caught her eye. A rider approached the Blackwood ranch, his silhouette unfamiliar. Visitors were rare, and Nora pressed her face against the glass, trying to make out details. The man rode a magnificent black horse and carried himself with confidence. He wasn't the Reverend she knew, Reverend Phillips's stooped posture and plodding mule, all too well. Below, Gerald Blackwood emerged from the barn, squinting suspiciously at the approaching rider. At 65, he was still a powerful man, his frame hardened by decades of ranching. The rifle in his hand sent a clear message. Strangers weren't welcome at the Blackwood property. "State your business," Gerald called out when the rider was within earshot. Holt pulled Midnight to a stop, keeping his hands visible. He'd encountered enough hostile receptions to recognize the danger in a nervous man with a rifle. "Name's Holt Reeves," he replied calmly. "Looking for information about a man passing through these parts. Jacob Winters. Thought you might have seen him." Gerald's eyes narrowed. "Reeves, the Shadow Rider." Holt nodded once, his expression unchanging. "That was a long time ago. I carry a bounty hunter's license now." "We don't want your kind around here," Gerald said, raising his rifle slightly. "Haven't seen any Winters. Now move along." From her window, Nora strained to hear the conversation. The name Shadow Rider drifted up to her, and her heart quickened. She'd heard stories everyone had about the outlaw who never killed unless forced, who stole from the wealthy and corrupt, and who had somehow earned a pardon for his crimes. Some called him a criminal, others a hero. "Just passing through," Holt replied, his tone remaining even despite the rifle pointed his way. "Heard he might have stopped at your place. He has a way of convincing folks to help him." "Nobody stops here without my say-so," Gerald insisted, his finger hovering near the trigger. "This is private property and you're trespassing." Martha appeared on the porch, her thin frame rigid with tension. "Gerald, what's happening?" "Nothing, woman. This bounty hunter was just leaving." Holt's gaze shifted between the two, noting the nervous energy that seemed excessive for a simple trespassing matter. His years as an outlaw had taught him to recognize when people were hiding something. He tipped his hat politely. "Apologies for the intrusion, madam. I'll be on my way." As he turned Midnight around, Holt caught a flicker of movement in an upper window, a pale face quickly disappearing from view. Interesting, he thought, but filed the observation away without comment. Silver Creek awaited, and Winters was his priority. Nora backed away from the window, her heart pounding. For a brief moment, she'd locked eyes with the stranger, his piercing blue gaze seeming to look straight through her. Had he seen her? Would he think anything of a woman in an attic window? Probably not. But the encounter, brief as it was, had been her first connection with someone outside the Blackwood family in months, and it sent a thrill of something long forgotten through her veins. Hope. That evening, Reverend Phillips arrived for dinner as expected. From her locked room, Nora could hear the murmur of conversation, the occasional clink of silverware, and Martha's forced laughter. The Reverend was a frequent visitor, supposedly providing spiritual guidance to the elderly couple, though Nora suspected his interest had more to do with the substantial donations Gerald made to the church. She pressed her ear to the floor, straining to hear. "Most unfortunate situation," the Reverend was saying. "But you've done the Christian thing, taking care of the poor girl. Mental afflictions are a terrible burden." "Yes," Martha replied, her voice carrying the practiced tone of pious suffering. "After Thomas died, she simply lost her mind with grief. Violent outbursts, delusions. The doctor said it might be permanent." Nora bit her lip to keep from crying out at the lie. There had been no doctor, no diagnosis. Only her in-law's determination to keep control of her husband's property and inheritance. "We pray for her recovery daily," Gerald added solemnly. "But until then, keeping her secured is for her own protection." Of course," the Reverend agreed. "The Lord works in mysterious ways. Perhaps this trial is meant to strengthen your faith." Nora moved away from the floor, disgust rising in her throat. They had crafted their story well, ensuring that anyone who might question her absence would believe she was being cared for, not imprisoned. In the beginning, she'd screamed and fought, but it had only reinforced their claims about her mental state. Now, she knew her only hope was escape, but the opportunity seemed as distant as the mountains on the horizon. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, autumn painting the landscape in golds and reds. In Silver Creek, Holt Reeves sat in the sheriff's office, a cup of coffee cooling on the desk before him. "Winter's definitely passed through," Sheriff Dawson confirmed, stroking his gray mustache. "Spent 2 nights at the hotel under a false name, but Maggie, who cleans the rooms, recognized him from the wanted poster. By the time she told me, he'd already left." "Any idea which direction?" Holt asked, his mind already mapping possible routes. "South, according to the stable boy. Said something about meeting a partner near the Blackwood ranch." Holt's interest sharpened. "Blackwood, the place I stopped yesterday. That's the one. Old Gerald Blackwood and his wife. They've kept to themselves since their son died last year. Mining accident." The sheriff leaned back in his chair. "Strange folk. Used to be more sociable when Thomas was alive. His widow still lives with them, I hear, though nobody's seen her in months, supposedly unwell." "The son had a wife?" Holt asked, recalling the face in the window. "Yes, young thing named Nora. Pretty as a picture. Married Thomas against her father's wishes. He wanted her to marry some banker from back east. Can't say I blame the girl for choosing differently. Thomas was well liked." Holt sipped his coffee, considering this new information. "And no one's seen her recently?" Sheriff Dawson shrugged. "Martha Blackwood tells everyone the poor girl had a breakdown after Thomas died. Keeps to her room, won't see visitors. Doc Harrison hasn't been called out there, though, which seems odd for someone supposedly ill for nearly a year." A suspicion began forming in Holt's mind, but he kept it to himself. "I'll head back that way then. If Winters is meeting someone near the Blackwood place, I want to be there." The sheriff nodded. "Just be careful. Gerald's got a temper, especially where his property is concerned." "And Reeves," he hesitated. "I know your reputation, but I run a clean jurisdiction here. No shooting unless absolutely necessary." "Understood, Sheriff," Holt replied, standing and placing his hat on his head. "I prefer to bring them in alive anyway. Dead men don't tell you where they've hidden their stolen goods." As Holt rode back toward the Blackwood ranch, his thoughts kept returning to the face in the window. If Winters was indeed planning to meet someone near the property, it provided the perfect excuse to take a closer look. Something about the situation didn't sit right with him, and Holt had learned to trust his instincts. He approached more cautiously this time, circling wide to approach from the back of the property. Tethering midnight in a grove of trees, he continued on foot, moving silently through the underbrush until he had a clear view of the ranch house. It was a substantial 2-story building with a small attic window visible at the peak of the roof, the same window where he'd glimpsed the face. For several hours, Holt observed the property. Gerald spent the morning mending fences in the corral, while Martha hung laundry and tended to chickens. No one else emerged from the house, and no meals were carried in. Strange, if there was indeed an invalid being cared for inside. As dusk approached, Holt noticed Gerald loading a wagon while Martha brought out packages wrapped in brown paper. They appeared to be preparing for a trip into town. This might be his only opportunity to investigate more closely. He waited until the wagon disappeared down the long drive before approaching the house. The back door was locked, but Holt's past had equipped him with skills legitimate bounty hunting rarely required. Within moments, he was inside the kitchen, moving silently through the dimly lit house. The ground floor revealed nothing unusual: a parlor, dining room, and Gerald and Martha's bedroom. Upstairs, he found what must have been Thomas's bedroom, preserved like a shrine, and 2 empty guest rooms. No sign of a widow, mentally ill or otherwise. Then he noticed a narrow door at the end of the hallway, locked from the outside with a padlock. Odd for an interior door. Drawing his lockpicks once more, Holt made quick work of the simple mechanism. Beyond was a steep staircase leading to what must be the attic. At the top of the stairs, another locked door confronted him. As he worked on this lock, he heard a shuffling sound from within. Someone was definitely inside. The lock clicked open, and Holt slowly pushed the door inward, his hand resting cautiously on his holstered pistol. The attic room was small but neat, with sloped ceilings and a single window. A narrow bed stood against one wall, a washstand beside it. And there, backed against the far wall with a makeshift weapon, a piece of wood broken from the bed frame, stood a young woman with fierce determination in her eyes. "Stay back," she warned, her voice hoarse but steady. "I don't know who you are, but I'll fight if I must." Holt raised his hand slowly, showing he was unarmed. "My name is Holt Reeves. I'm not here to hurt you. Are you Nora Blackwood?" Surprise flickered across her face. "How do you know my name?" "I was in Silver Creek. The sheriff mentioned you." He remained in the doorway, giving her space. "He said you were unwell, but you don't look sick to me. You look like a prisoner." Nora's weapon lowered slightly, hope and suspicion warring in her expression. "They tell everyone I lost my mind when Thomas died. It's a lie. They locked me up to keep control of the ranch and Thomas's money. Why didn't you call for help when I was here yesterday? I saw you at the window. And risk Gerald shooting you on the spot." Nora shook her head. "Besides, who would believe me over them? They've spent a year convincing everyone I'm insane." Holt studied her carefully. She was thin, but her eyes were clear and intelligent. Nothing about her suggested mental instability, only the desperation of long confinement. "They've gone to town," he said. "This might be your only chance to leave. Can you ride?" Nora's grip on her makeshift weapon finally relaxed. "Since I was a child, but where would I go? They'd find me, bring me back, claim I had an episode." "Not if you come with me," Holt offered, surprising himself. "I'm tracking a criminal who's supposed to be meeting someone near here. Once I've captured him, I could take you to the territorial capital. You could petition the court for your rights and property." "You're the Shadow Rider," Nora said suddenly, recognition dawning. "I heard Gerald say it yesterday." Holt's expression hardened slightly. "That was a long time ago. I'm a bounty hunter now, legal work." "I don't care what you were," Nora replied, a new determination straightening her shoulders. "You're offering me freedom, and I'll take it, whatever the risk." She glanced around the small room that had been her prison for so long. "I need 5 minutes to gather my things." Holt nodded. "Be quick. We don't know when they'll return." While Nora gathered the few possessions worth taking, a locket containing a portrait of her parents, a small Bible, and a change of clothes, Holt rummaged through Gerald's desk downstairs. Among the papers, he found what he was looking for: Thomas Blackwood's will, stating clearly that his entire estate was to pass to his wife upon his death. "Legal theft," he muttered, tucking the document into his coat. It would be evidence for Nora's case. 10 minutes later, they were riding away from the ranch, Nora seated behind Holt on Midnight. The powerful horse handled their combined weight with ease, putting distance between them and the Blackwood property with every stride. "We'll need to move carefully," Holt explained as they rode. "I still have a job to do, and your in-laws will raise the alarm as soon as they discover you're gone." "I understand," Nora replied, her arms wrapped cautiously around his waist. It was the first time she had touched a man since Thomas died, and despite her circumstances, she felt a flutter of awareness at the solid strength of him. "I won't be a burden, just don't take me back there." "I won't," Holt promised, and something in his voice told Nora he meant it. They rode until nightfall, making camp in a sheltered ravine several miles from any established trail. As Holt built a small, nearly smokeless fire, Nora sat wrapped in the blanket he'd provided, breathing deeply of the open air. Freedom, even temporary and uncertain, felt like a miracle. "Thank you," she said simply when he handed her a tin cup of coffee. "I had almost given up hope." Holt nodded, settling across the fire from her. "No one deserves to be caged like that, but you should know what you're getting into traveling with me. Jacob Winters is dangerous and I intend to capture him. It could get risky." "After a year in that attic, risk feels like a gift," Nora replied. She sipped the coffee, grimacing slightly at the bitter taste. "Besides, I'm not helpless. Before Thomas died, I managed the household accounts, helped with the ranch. I can shoot, too. Father insisted all his children learn, even his daughters." "Good," Holt said with a slight smile. "That might come in handy." He studied her across the flames. "Tell me about Thomas." "He must have been a good man for you to go against your father's wishes to marry him." Nora's expression softened with memory. "He was kind. Funny, too. We met at a church social when he came east to arrange cattle sales. He talked about Montana like it was heaven on earth, the mountains, the open spaces." She paused, looking up at the star-filled sky. "He wasn't wrong about the beauty of it. How did his parents become your jailers?" Her face darkened. "After Thomas died, I was lost in grief. They offered to help manage things temporarily. Within weeks, they had taken control of the accounts, the property, everything. When I objected, Gerald claimed I was having a breakdown. The first time I tried to leave, he locked me in my room. When I broke the window trying to escape, they moved me to the attic. No one questioned them. They've lived in that valley for 30 years. Holt's jaw tightened. "The law should have protected you." "The law is 3 days' ride away," Nora said with a shrug. "And Gerald is friends with most of the men who might have helped me." They talked late into the night, Nora eager for conversation after so long in isolation. She learned that Holt had grown up on a small farm in Kansas, that his parents had been killed by raiders during the war, and that he'd drifted west afterward, eventually falling in with a gang of outlaws. His years as the Shadow Rider had ended when he'd helped rescue the governor's daughter, earning a pardon in exchange for his help capturing his former associates. "Now I track men worse than I ever was," he concluded. "It pays well enough and I'm good at it." "Do you ever miss it?" Nora asked. The freedom of answering to no one. Holt considered her question seriously. "Sometimes, but there's freedom in walking into a town without looking over my shoulder, too." He added another stick to the fire. "You should get some sleep. We have a long ride tomorrow." Nora nodded, though sleep seemed impossible with so many thoughts racing through her mind. She arranged her blanket and lay down, watching Holt through half-closed eyes as he kept vigil. In the firelight, his features seemed carved from stone, handsome in a severe way, with a quiet strength that made her feel safer than she had in months. Morning came too quickly, the pale light rousing Nora from dreams of pursuit. They ate a simple breakfast of jerky and hardtack before continuing their journey. Holt had decided they would circle back toward the area where Winters was supposedly meeting his partner, approaching from the opposite direction to avoid the Blackwood ranch. "If we're lucky, we'll intercept Winters before your in-laws even realize you're gone," Holt explained as they rode. "And if we're not lucky?" Nora asked. "Then things get complicated," he admitted. "But I've handled complicated before." By midday, they had reached a ridge overlooking a small valley with a creek running through it, a natural meeting place for travelers needing water. Holt dismounted, helping Nora down before securing Midnight to a tree. "Stay here," he instructed, handing her his spare pistol. "If anyone but me approaches, fire a warning shot." Nora checked the weapon with practiced ease, demonstrating that her claim about knowing how to shoot wasn't an exaggeration. "Be careful," she said softly. Holt disappeared into the trees, moving silently toward the valley below. From his vantage point among the rocks, he could see two horses tethered near the creek, one he recognized from the description of Winter's dappled gray. Two men sat beside a small fire, deep in conversation. Moving closer, Holt could finally make out their faces. One was indeed Jacob Winters, a wiry man with a scarred face and nervous hands. The other was a surprised Gerald Blackwood. The pieces clicked into place immediately. Winters wasn't meeting a criminal partner. He was meeting the owner of a secluded property where he could hide. The question was whether Gerald was helping him out of greed or fear. Holt crept closer, straining to hear their conversation. "More than we agreed," Gerald was saying, his voice tense. "The risk has increased," Winters spat into the fire. "Risks are my concern, old man. You just provide the hiding place and I'll provide the gold. 50-50 like we arranged." "The law's been asking questions. That bounty hunter who came by, Reeves," Winters laughed harshly. "He's a problem I intend to solve permanently. Word is he's still in Silver Creek." "Just make sure it's nowhere near my property," Gerald insisted. "I've got enough complications with that daughter-in-law of mine." "Still keeping her locked up, are you?" Winters seemed amused. "Might be simpler to make her disappear altogether. Accidents happen all the time." Gerald's expression darkened. "That's not how we do things. Martha and I are God-fearing people." "God-fearing people who imprison innocent women," Winters retorted. "Don't get high and mighty with me, Blackwood. We're cut from the same cloth, you and I. We take what we want." Holt had heard enough. Withdrawing silently, he circled to approach from behind Winters. With Gerald present, the situation required more finesse than a direct confrontation. If he could get the drop on Winters first, Gerald might be too shocked to resist. As he moved into position, a twig snapped underfoot, a small sound but enough in the quiet valley. Winters whirled, drawing his pistol with practiced speed. "Who's there?" he called, scanning the trees. "Show yourself." Holt pressed against a boulder, cursing silently. The element of surprise was lost. He would have to try a different approach. "Jacob Winters," he called out, staying behind cover. "I have a warrant for your arrest. Surrender peacefully and you'll get a fair trial." Winters fired in the direction of Holt's voice, the bullet splintering bark from a nearby tree. "Fair trial? Like the one you got, Shadow Rider? I don't think so." Gerald had scrambled for his horse, clearly wanting no part of the confrontation. Holt couldn't let him escape, not when he knew the truth about Nora. Making a split-second decision, Holt fired a shot that kicked up dirt near Gerald's feet, stopping him in his tracks. "Stay where you are, Blackwood. You're not leaving." Winters seized the distraction to dash for cover behind a large rock, firing wildly as he moved. One bullet grazed Holt's arm, tearing his sleeve and drawing blood. The standoff had begun. On the ridge above, Nora heard the gunshots and felt her heart race. Something had gone wrong. She hesitated, torn between following Holt's instructions to stay put and her desire to help. Through a gap in the trees, she could see three figures below Holt. A stranger she assumed was Winters, and to her shock, her father-in-law. What was Gerald doing there? The implications were disturbing. If he was meeting with a known criminal, it suggested a level of corruption beyond even what she had experienced. And now Holt was caught in the middle, pinned down by gunfire. Decision made, Nora moved along the ridge, looking for a position that would give her a better view without exposing herself. Finding a rocky outcrop, she settled behind it. The pistol Holt had given her held steady in both hands. Below, Winters and Holt exchanged fire, neither gaining advantage. Gerald remained frozen beside his horse, clearly terrified. "This doesn't concern you, Blackwood," Winters shouted. "Get out of here, draw his fire. You want him to be a human shield," Holt called back. "Don't listen to him, Gerald. He'll let you die to save himself." Gerald looked frantically between the two men, indecision paralyzing him. Nora saw her chance. While both men focused on Gerald, she took careful aim at Winters. The distance was considerable, but her father had trained her well. Exhaling slowly, she squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the valley. Winters cried out, clutching his shoulder as blood spread across his shirt. The momentary distraction was all Holt needed. He lunged from cover, closing the distance to Winters before the injured man could recover. A brief, violent struggle ensued, ending with Winters face down on the ground, Holt's knee in his back as he secured the outlaw's wrists with handcuffs. Gerald, seeing Winters subdued, made another dash for his horse. This time, Nora's second shot kicked up dirt directly in front of the animal, causing it to rear in panic. Gerald tumbled backward, landing hard on the ground. Holt looked up at the ridge, a mixture of surprise and admiration on his face as he spotted Nora's position. With Winters secured, he approached Gerald, who was still trying to regain his breath after his fall. "Consorting with wanted criminals," Holt said, hauling the older man to his feet. "That's a serious offense, Blackwood, almost as serious as false imprisonment." Gerald's face paled. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," Holt replied as Nora made her way down the slope to join them. "And here comes your victim now." The look of shock on Gerald's face when he saw Nora approaching, pistol still in hand, was almost comical. How did you? I freed her," Holt stated flatly. "And I found Thomas's will. You had no right to keep her prisoner, no right to her property." "She was unstable," Gerald protested weakly. "We were protecting her. Lying won't help you now," Nora said, her voice steady despite the emotion churning inside her. "You locked me away to steal what Thomas left me. You would have kept me there forever." Winters, still face down on the ground, laughed bitterly. "Told you you should have made her disappear, Blackwood. Too late now." Holt silenced the outlaw with a sharp jab to the ribs. "We're taking both of you to Silver Creek. The sheriff can decide what to do with you until a circuit judge arrives." "Martha," Gerald began. "Will be dealt with too," Holt finished for him. "I imagine the sheriff will send someone to collect her." With both men secured Winters on his own horse with his hands cuffed, Gerald tied to his saddle, they began the journey to Silver Creek. Nora rode behind Holt again, her arms wrapped more confidently around his waist this time. "That was a good shot," he commented as they rode. "You saved my life." "We saved each other," she replied simply. For the first time in a year, she felt like herself again, capable, strong, free. Sheriff Dawson was stunned when they rode into Silver Creek with not only the wanted Jacob Winters, but also the respected Gerald Blackwood in custody. As Holt explained the situation, Winters' crimes, Gerald's complicity, and Nora's imprisonment, the sheriff's expression grew increasingly grave. "These are serious allegations, Mrs. Blackwood," he said to Nora. "Are you certain you want to press charges against your father-in-law?" "I am," Nora confirmed. "What they did to me was cruel and illegal. I want justice, not revenge, but I won't let them escape consequences." The sheriff nodded solemnly. "I'll send deputies to bring in Mrs. Blackwood and secure the property until legal ownership can be determined." He turned to Holt. "The bounty on Winters is yours, Reeves. Good work." While the sheriff's men locked up the prisoners, Holt and Nora took rooms at the town's small hotel. After a year of confinement, the simple hotel room seemed luxurious to Nora. A hot bath, clean clothes purchased from the general store, and a proper meal in the dining room began to restore her sense of normality. That evening, they sat on the hotel's porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. For the first time, they could simply talk without the pressure of pursuit or danger. "What will you do now?" Holt asked as darkness fell. "Once the legal matters are settled and the ranch is returned to you," Nora considered the question. "I'm not sure I want to stay there with all those memories, both good and terrible. I might sell it, start fresh somewhere else." She glanced at him. "What about you?" "On to the next bounty," Holt nodded slowly. "That's how it usually works, though I admit this job turned out differently than most." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant piano music from the saloon down the street. Nora studied his profile in the fading light, noting the way he seemed more relaxed now, the perpetual vigilance temporarily eased. "You could stay," she suggested quietly. "At least until the circuit judge arrives. I'll need a witness for my case." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of possibilities neither had anticipated when their paths crossed. "I'll stay," Holt agreed, his voice gentle, "for as long as you need me." The next 2 weeks brought dramatic changes to Nora's circumstances. With Holt's testimony and the evidence of Thomas's will, the circuit judge ruled unequivocally in her favor. The Blackwood Ranch was legally returned to her possession, while Gerald and Martha faced charges of false imprisonment and conspiracy. Jacob Winters was sentenced to hang for his crimes, though he would first serve time in the territorial prison while awaiting his execution date. As autumn deepened toward winter, Nora began the process of reclaiming her life. She hired new hands for the ranch, opened accounts in her own name at the bank, and slowly reintegrated into the community that had been told she was mentally unstable. Some believed her story immediately. Others required time to accept the truth about the respected Blackwood elders. Through it all, Holt remained in Silver Creek, taking no new bounties, offering quiet support as Nora navigated her newly regained independence. They fell into an easy, routine breakfast together at the hotel, days spent on their separate tasks, evenings sharing stories on the porch or by the fire. Townsfolk noticed their growing closeness, of course. Whispers circulated about the widow and the reformed outlaw, some disapproving, others romantic. Neither Holt nor Nora paid much attention to the gossip. What was developing between them felt too precious, too unexpected to be affected by outside opinions. On a crisp November morning, Nora approached Holt as he tended to midnight outside the livery stable. "I've made a decision about the ranch," she announced without preamble. "I'm keeping it." Holt looked up, surprise evident in his expression. "What changed your mind, visiting it yesterday?" "Being there without fear for the first time in so long." She leaned against the stable wall, watching him brush the magnificent horse. It was Thomas's dream, that land. Making it succeed would honor him. And she hesitated. "I realized I don't want to run from the painful memories. They're part of my story now." Holt nodded in understanding. "It's good land. With the right help you could make it thrive. That's why I'm here, actually." Nora took a deep breath. "I need a foreman, someone who knows the territory, who can help rebuild what Gerald neglected, someone I trust." Their eyes met, and Holt set down the brush slowly. "Are you offering me a job, Mrs. Blackwood?" "I'm offering you a reason to stay," she replied simply. "If you want one." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken feelings that had been growing steadily since that night in the ravine when they'd first truly talked. "People will talk," Holt said finally. "The widow and the outlaw, living on the same property." "People already talk," Nora countered with a small smile. "Let them. I've spent too long worrying about what others think. Now I intend to live by my own judgment." Holt stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "And what does your judgment tell you about me? That you're a good man who did some bad things. That you risked your life to free a woman you didn't know. That you've stayed when you could have collected your bounty and left." Her voice softened. "That I feel more alive when you're near." Something in Holt's expression changed, a guardedness falling away to reveal vulnerability she'd never seen in him before. His hand rose slowly to touch her cheek, giving her every opportunity to step back if she wished. She didn't. His kiss was gentle, questioning at first, then deepening as she responded. Nora's hands found their way to his shoulders, steadying herself against the rush of sensations, his warmth, the slight roughness of his unshaven jaw against her skin, the tenderness in his touch that belied his dangerous reputation. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Holt rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the night by the fire," he admitted quietly. "Why didn't you?" Nora asked, her hands still resting on his shoulders. "You deserve time. Freedom without obligations or complications." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "And I wasn't sure I had any right to want you." "We don't always get what we deserve in this life," she replied. "Sometimes we get better, sometimes worse. But we should never refuse happiness when it's offered." Holt's smile, rare and transformative, lightened his entire face. "In that case, Mrs. Blackwood, I accept your offer. Both of them." Winter settled over the Montana territory, blanketing the landscape in pristine white. The Blackwood Ranch, now simply called the Willow Creek Ranch, Nora, having decided to reclaim her maiden name of Williams, underwent a transformation as dramatic as the changing seasons. Under Holt's direction, new hands were hired, fences mended, and cattle tended properly for the first time since Thomas's death. The house, too, changed. Nora removed the heavy drapes that had kept the rooms in perpetual gloom during her in-law's residence, replacing them with lighter fabrics that welcomed the winter sunlight. Martha's somber religious paintings gave way to landscapes and family portraits. Even the attic was transformed, the locks removed, the space converted to storage, the painful memories gradually overlaid with new ones. Nora and Holt maintained separate residences during these months, she in the main house, he in the foreman's cabin nearby. Their relationship grew slowly, deliberately, built on mutual respect and shared experiences. In the evenings, they often sat together by the fire, planning improvements for the spring, sharing books, or simply enjoying each other's company in comfortable silence. The town's attitude toward them evolved as well. Initial skepticism gave way to acceptance as people witnessed Holt's dedication to the ranch and Nora's renewed confidence and spirit. The story of her imprisonment and rescue became something of a local legend, embellished with each retelling, until Holt was credited with single-handedly fighting off a dozen outlaws to save her. "You should hear what they're saying in the saloon," Holt commented one evening as they shared dinner in the ranch house. "Apparently, I shot Winters twice while carrying you on my shoulder." Nora laughed, the sound easy and natural now. "Don't forget how you leaped from the roof to your horse." "Midnight would never forgive such treatment," he replied with a smile, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Does it bother you, the gossip?" "Not anymore," she said truthfully. "Let them talk. We know the truth." She squeezed his hand gently. "Besides, the real story is remarkable enough without embellishment." As winter began to relent to early spring, Nora received a letter from the territorial prison. Gerald Blackwood had died of pneumonia while serving his sentence. Martha remained incarcerated but would likely be released within the year due to her age and declining health. The news brought complicated emotions. Nora felt no joy in Gerald's death, only a sense of closure. She had long since released her anger toward her in-laws, choosing instead to focus on rebuilding her life. "Will you attend the funeral?" Holt asked when she shared the news. Nora considered the question carefully. "Yes, not for Gerald's sake, but for Thomas. He loved his father despite his flaws. He would want me to go." Holt nodded in understanding. "I'll go with you if you want." "I do," she said softly. "Thank you." The funeral was a small affair. Few people came to mourn a man who had died in disgrace. Martha was permitted to attend under guard. Her once imposing figure now stooped and frail. She did not speak to Nora, though their eyes met briefly across the open grave, Martha's filled with bitterness, Nora's with pity. As they rode back to the ranch afterward, Nora felt as though a chapter had truly closed. "It's strange," she said, breaking the contemplative silence. "A year ago I was their prisoner. Now I'm free, and Gerald is gone, and nothing is as I expected it would be." "Life rarely follows the paths we anticipate," Holt replied. "Sometimes that's for the better." She glanced at him, riding tall beside her. "Definitely for the better." That evening, as they stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the newly green landscape with gold, Holt seemed unusually quiet, almost nervous, a state Nora had rarely seen in him. "Is something wrong?" she asked, concerned by his uncharacteristic restlessness. He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I've been thinking a lot about the future, about what happens next." Nora's heart quickened. "And what have you concluded?" "That I don't want to be just your foreman anymore." He took her hands in his. "I want more if you'll have me." The simple statement hung in the air between them, its implications clear. Nora studied his face, the strong lines softened by emotion, the blue eyes revealing a vulnerability few had ever been permitted to see. "Are you proposing, Holt Reeves?" she asked softly. "Inelegantly, perhaps," he acknowledged with a slight smile. "But yes, I love you, Nora. I think I have since that night by the fire when you told me your story. You're the strongest woman I've ever known, and I want to build a life with you if you want the same." Nora felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "I do want that, very much." She moved closer, resting her hands against his chest. "I love you too. I think I started falling for you the moment you opened that attic door and offered me freedom." His kiss was tender, a promise of the future they would build together. When they parted, Holt reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold ring. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "The only thing I kept from my life before." Nora examined the delicate band, touched by the significance of the gift. "It's perfect." They were married in April, when the wildflowers carpeted the meadows surrounding the ranch. The ceremony was small but joyful, attended by the ranch hands, townsfolk who had become friends, and even Sheriff Dawson, who had supported Nora throughout the legal proceedings. Reverend Phillips was notably absent, having refused to perform the ceremony after learning of Holt's past. In his place, a younger minister from a neighboring town officiated, speaking eloquently about redemption and second chances. As Nora and Holt exchanged vows beneath an arch of spring blossoms, she felt Thomas's presence not as a shadow over her new happiness, but as a benevolent witness. She would always honor his memory, but her heart now belonged fully to the man standing before her, whose unexpected appearance in her life had transformed tragedy into hope. The celebration afterward lasted well into the night, with music, dancing, and more food than the small gathering could possibly consume. When the last guests had departed, Holt swept Nora into his arms and carried her across the threshold of the house that was now truly their home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reeves," he said, setting her gently on her feet in the parlor where a fire crackled welcomingly. "Home," Nora repeated, savoring the word and all it represented, not just the ranch, but the sense of belonging she'd found with Holt. "It sounds wonderful." Life settled into a new rhythm as spring gave way to summer. The ranch thrived under their joint management, Nora handling the accounts and business dealings, Holt overseeing the daily operations. They complemented each other perfectly, her thoughtful planning balancing his decisive action. On a warm August evening, they sat on the porch swing Holt had built as a wedding gift, watching the sunset gild the distant mountains. Nora's head rested comfortably on his shoulder, his arm wrapped around her waist. "I have news," she said after a comfortable silence. "Doctor Harrison confirmed it today." Holt looked down at her questioningly. "We're going to have a baby," Nora told him, her eyes shining with joy, "in early winter." The expression that crossed Holt's face was one Nora would treasure forever, a mixture of shock, joy, and wonder that transformed his usually composed features. "A baby? Are you certain?" She nodded, laughing at his amazement. "Quite certain. Are you happy?" In answer, he kissed her deeply, then placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it. I never thought I'd have a family of my own." "Nor did I after everything that happened," Nora admitted. "It feels like a miracle." They sat together as twilight deepened, planning and dreaming. Holt spoke of teaching their child to ride, Nora of reading stories by the fire on winter evenings. They debated names, considered which room would make the best nursery, and imagined Christmases and birthdays to come. "Do you ever think about how improbable this all is?" Nora asked as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. "If you hadn't come looking for winters, if you hadn't noticed me in that window." "I try not to dwell on what might have been," Holt replied, his arms tightening around her. "But I'm grateful every day for whatever fate or chance brought me to your window." "The shadow rider and the attic prisoner," Nora mused with a smile. "Not the most conventional love story." "But ours," Holt said simply. "And I wouldn't change a word of it." As winter approached once more, the ranch prepared for two arrivals: the baby, due in December, and Martha Blackwood, scheduled for release from prison in November. The latter had been a subject of much discussion between Nora and Holt. "She has nowhere else to go," Nora had argued. "And whatever she did, she's Thomas's mother. I can't leave her destitute." Holt had been skeptical but supportive. "It's your decision. But she stays in the guest house, not the main house. And at the first sign of trouble, we'll reconsider," Nora had agreed. "But people can change." "You're proof of that." When Martha arrived, she was a shadow of the imperious woman who had delivered trays to Nora's attic prison. Prison had aged her dramatically, leaving her thin and frail. She accepted Nora's offer of the guest house with wary gratitude, clearly expecting some form of retribution. Instead, Nora treated her with calm kindness, not pretending the past hadn't happened, but refusing to perpetuate its bitterness. Holt maintained a more distant relationship with his mother-in-law, civil but guarded. As Nora's pregnancy progressed, an unexpected transformation occurred in Martha. Faced with the impending arrival of her grandchild, she began to soften. She knitted blankets, offered advice on infant care from her experience with Thomas, and gradually became a part of the household. "I was wrong," she admitted to Nora one afternoon as they shelled peas on the porch. "About you, about many things." Nora glanced up, surprised by the unprecedented acknowledgement. "Why did you do it? Lock me away like that?" Martha's hands stilled, her eyes fixed on the distant mountains. "Fear at first. Gerald was so afraid of losing the ranch. Thomas was his legacy, his only child, when he died." She shook her head slowly. "Gerald couldn't accept it. He convinced himself that keeping the ranch in Blackwood hands was honoring Thomas's memory, and I went along with it, God help me. And later, Nora pressed gently, when you saw what it was doing to me, by then, there seemed no way out. If we released you, we'd face consequences, so we convinced ourselves it was for the best. Tears glimmered in the older woman's eyes. I know it's unforgivable. I've forgiven you, Nora said simply. Not forgotten, but forgiven, for Thomas's sake and for my own peace. Martha looked at her with genuine wonder. You're a remarkable woman. Thomas chose well, and so did Mr. Reeves. It was as close to a blessing as Martha would ever give, but it was enough. A tentative peace had been established, allowing them all to look toward the future instead of remaining trapped in the past. December arrived with a heavy snowfall that blanketed the ranch in pristine white. Nora's time grew near, prompting Holt to insist that Dr. Harrison stay at the ranch until the baby arrived. The doctor agreed, settling into one of the guest rooms with his medical bag always close at hand. On the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, Nora went into labor. Holt paced anxiously outside the bedroom while Dr. Harrison and Martha attended to Nora. The hours stretched endlessly, punctuated by Nora's cries and the doctor's calm instructions. Near dawn, as the first pale light illuminated the snow-covered landscape, a new cry joined the symphony, the lusty wail of a newborn entering the world. Moments later, Dr. Harrison opened the door, his tired face wreathed in smiles. Congratulations, Mr. Reeves. You have a daughter. Holt entered the bedroom with reverent steps. Nora lay propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. Martha stood nearby, her usual reserve softened by the miracle they had witnessed. Come meet your daughter, Nora said softly as Holt approached the bed. With trembling hands, he accepted the tiny bundle. The baby's face was red and wrinkled, her eyes squeezed shut, a dusting of dark hair covering her perfect head. As he watched, she yawned and blinked, revealing eyes that would eventually match his own blue ones. She's beautiful, he whispered, overcome with emotion. Like her mother. What shall we call her? Nora asked, reaching out to touch his arm. Holt considered the tiny life in his arms, this miraculous being who represented everything he had never dared to hope for: family, home, redemption. Hope, he suggested. Because that's what she is. What you've given me. Holt Reeves, Nora tested the name, smiling her approval. It's perfect. Martha quietly excused herself, allowing the new parents a private moment with their daughter. As the sun rose fully, casting golden light through the windows, Holt sat beside Nora on the bed, one arm around her shoulders, the other helping to support their sleeping daughter. A year ago, I was hunting winters with no thought beyond the next bounty, he marveled. And now? And now you're home, Nora completed for him, resting her head against his shoulder. We both are. Outside, the ranch was coming to life, horses being fed, smoke rising from the bunkhouse chimney, a new day beginning. Inside, a new family embraced their future, built on an unlikely foundation of imprisonment and rescue, outlaw and widow. Darkness transformed into light. Hope slept peacefully between them, unaware of the extraordinary journey that had brought her parents together, or of the love story that would become part of her heritage. She knew only the warmth of their embrace, the security of their love, and the promise of a life unbounded by the constraints that had once defined her mother's existence. For Nora and Holt, that promise was enough, a future stretching before them like the vast Montana landscape, filled with possibilities neither could have imagined when fate first crossed their paths on an autumn day at the Blackwood Ranch. As spring returned once more to the valley, the ranch continued to flourish. Hope grew from a newborn to a curious infant, delighting her parents with each milestone. Martha had settled into her role as grandmother with unexpected grace, finding a measure of redemption in her devotion to the child. On the anniversary of Nora's rescue, she and Holt stood on the porch of their home, watching the sunset bathe the mountains in amber light. Hope slept peacefully in her mother's arms, her tiny hand curled around her father's finger. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you hadn't come looking for Winters that day?" Nora asked, echoing a question she had posed nearly a year before. Holt smiled, drawing his family closer. "No, some things are meant to be even when they begin in darkness. Like a kind-hearted outlaw freeing a locked-away widow," Nora suggested with a smile. "Exactly like that," Holt agreed, kissing her gently as the last rays of sunlight gilded their world in gold.